Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1991 concert film, 1991, the year punk broke. Now, before I go any further sharing my thoughts on this concert video, I would like to give a special shout out to Vontae for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, this is labeled as a documentary, but if you ask me, that's an incredible stretch because there's no context to anything, there's no structure to this, there's no interviews with the band or the different bands talking about their process of making the songs or making their album or what it's like being on tour. Or what it's like being a part of the music industry, or what music means to them, or any of that. So it's not really a documentary. What it is it's more of a lo-fi concert video. Because there's just a lot of B-roll and a lot of footage of different people. Mostly band members from Sonic Youth just messing around in front of the camera, doing stuff for laughs in between takes, just doing a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily that focused. Just a lot of random shenanigans and playing the fool. Like the opening of the movie is just Sonic Youth riffing for what feels like forever and doing some really unfunny, forced, cringe-inducing satire of pretentious singers, and it's just so on the nose that it just is every bit as cringe as the lyrics or the kind of songs that those kind of artists perform. And it doesn't get much better from there when it comes to this video, because there's just so much involving Sonic Youth's frontman in particular, and him being in front of the camera. I think it's Thurston Moore, and I thought the guy was just insufferably annoying and pretentious, and just every time the camera was on him, it was like he was plastered or high or both, and it wasn't endearing to me. It was just obnoxious. It's the kind of guy that thinks he's really funny, but he never says anything or never does anything that's funny, but he keeps on doing the act. Thankfully, his talents as a singer and the band itself, Sonic Youth, isn't that bad. Although I think some of their songs are pretty shitty, at least the ones that I heard from this concert video. And speaking of shitty, this video features some really shitty direction. Like, this is a really poorly directed film by Dave Markey. Now, I think maybe that's the point, the lo-fi aesthetic. Maybe they're trying to make it deliberately look like a bootleg or look like somebody in the crowd while they were in the middle of a mosh shot some footage. But the end result is almost incomprehensible at times and headache-inducing. It really is. Like, there's so much with this film visually that's just really hard to look at, because there's just an overabundance of zooms. Like, the director just found out that he could zoom the camera in and out and just decided that that was the coolest thing ever, and it gets old after no time flat, and it's overdone. And there's a lot of shaky cam, a lot of camera work that is just very amateurish and just awful. It's an awful looking movie. The home movie stuff, I guess, looks a little bit better, but it's still just as amateurish as anything else. And The concert footage in particular is really an eyesore, especially when you throw in some really garish post processing and filters on top of certain performances, and throw in some extra choppy editing or no editing at all. Just throw in some random footage that you shot and then just leave it as is, and then throw in some other B-roll with Sonic Youth or Nirvana or Courtney Love and then call it a day. Um, the concert footage in particular is really poorly done, and it does everybody on stage a disservice. It really does, because it's hard to really get into the band's performances because there's no sense of immersion, which is what you're looking for out of a concert video. And it also doesn't really show them in the best light. There are certain performances where it's so dark and murky and fuzzy that you don't even know who is even performing unless you look it up, or unless you really know who you're looking for. And if that isn't bad enough, the sound sounds like they recorded all the band's performances with a tin can. I don't know if that's the mastering that was put on tape, on VHS, or the DVD version. I don't know what it is. Maybe that's another intentional thing, but it really makes this video and concert a film reek, because you can't even really hear most of these songs clearly, because there's just so much of it that's just done really poorly when it comes to the sound recording. It sounds like everything was either recorded underwater or with a tin can, to the point where you don't even understand any of the lyrics. It makes all of the instrumentals, the guitar work, and the drums, and a lot of that stuff sound very muddy. So yeah, it's not really something that even works as a concert video, because all of the performances just sound like shit. And you do get a good variety of bands in this. I'll give it that. I mean, you've got Sonic Youth, Nirvana, Dinosaur Jr., Babes in Toyland, Gumball, the Ramones, who do one song. So you got a good amount of variety here, and I think some of the performances aren't bad, and some of the sound design isn't the worst either. Like the first act actually sounded okay, Schizophrenia by Sonic Youth, but then after that, like a lot of them just sounded really bad and were shot really poorly. And then you'd have the random clips with Sonic Youth just jerking around in between takes, or uh, stuff like Dave Grohl talking about grapes, and it was irritating. It wasn't funny. It wasn't endearing to me. It was just annoying. And out of all of these bands, I mean, you could definitely tell that Nirvana was the one that was set to really break out in a big way, because they stood out among pretty much everybody in terms of even their production, to the point where even with the tin can audio, it still sounded better than a lot of these other bands. Um, and the other Sonic Youth was okay too when it comes to some of their songs, but some of their songs I really couldn't get into because they were just nonsense, or just poorly put together and poorly rendered overall. Uh, like Babes in Toyland did like one song, and I didn't really say anything about it because I couldn't understand or hear any of the lyrics because of how poor the sound of recording was. But I will say that there was one band that really stood out to me other than Nirvana and parts of Sonic Youth, and it was Dinosaur Jr. And I never even heard of Dinosaur Jr. until watching this, and I really liked the songs that they did here. which was the Wagon and Freak Scene. Freak Scene in particular. Like I really liked those tracks. And so I'll give this documentary that it introduced me to Dinosaur Jr., and that's definitely a positive. But it also introduced me to absolute just garbage tier bands like Gumball, who did one song on here called Pre, and it's just nonstop awful sounding guitar solos and drums and bass. That's it. There's no lyrics. It's just them fucking around with their instruments, and it's just as bad as it sounds. And even the Ramones, like I like the Ramones, but like I said, because of how bad the sound recording is, I couldn't even get into that performance at all. It just sounded like a garbled mess. Now, it's like 95 minutes, but it drags because there is no point to it. It's just random B-roll footage with Sonic Youth in between takes, maybe isn't the right word, but in between performances, and some stuff with them and other bandmates doing random stuff in different places locally. Like the band's front man Thurston will interview some guy who's running a bratwurst stand. There will be a moment where they go to some carnival and there's these animatronic giant apes that are for whatever reason talking, and they hang out in front of the apes, and the cameraman, the director, shoots the apes for a little bit. That's it. Like there's really nothing to it. Like I think there's one bit where MTV shows up and they're interviewing Courtney Love and a few other people, but there's not really a lot of context added to that. And I know people will say, well, Madonna's Truth or Dare is kind of a similar thing. But even a Madonna's Truth or Dare, when it comes to the random clips that were thrown in there in between song performances, they had high production values. And they tended to make a little bit more sense, even as pretentious as they were. And on top of that, like the concert performances in particular were really top tier. They were really well shot and well done compared to whatever this half-baked shit was. Like I want to get into this because I like a good amount of the bands that are in this, or I was curious to hear some new bands that I really hadn't heard of or really hadn't heard a lot of music from before, but I really didn't like this one. I could not get into it. It's not really a movie, so I can't really say that it's like one of the worst movies I've seen, but in terms of a concert video, this is definitely up there. Because you got some really piss poor production values, just completely unimpressive direction. There's no structure or anything. There's no interviews with anybody. And if that's what you're trying to do, that's fine, but at least do a better job with the concert scenes. Because that's supposed to be the main selling point, right? The concert scenes. And those are really badly done. But that's just me. I know this has its fans. There's a lot of people who really like this, and it's like a 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb, for instance. But this just wasn't really something that I thought was really that good or really honestly that fun to watch, despite the fact that there were some decent songs. Um, and a lot of it is just due to how it's shot and how the sound was recorded. It was, and the editing and just everything. It was just it genuinely gave me a splitting headache at times. And that's never a good sign. That's never a good thing when you're watching something and then you want to go reach for the nearest bottle of aspirin or ibuprofen. But that's just my thoughts on it. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.